Daniel, still marked by the grief of losing his wife, decided to test his new maid by deliberately leaving the house safe open. He didn't trust anyone, not even the woman who was taking care of his daughter. While reviewing the footage, he saw something that left him completely stunned. Clara not only ignored the safe, but also cared for his daughter with a tenderness he hadn't seen since his wife passed away. What happened next shook all of his certainties. Welcome to True Tales by Emma Blake, where real stories bring real emotions, shaped by the unpredictable twists of life itself. Daniel Brooks was not the kind of man who trusted easily. Ever since the death of his beloved wife, his heart had been closed off, even to those closest to him. Now, as a single father, his only concern was protecting his young daughter, Sophia. When he hired a new maid, Clara, he couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something was off. His wealth had made him paranoid, and so, as a test of her integrity, he did something bold. He left the safe in his study wide open. Clara, a humble woman who had only recently started working for Daniel, went about her duties that day, cleaning the house with meticulous care. When she entered the study, the safe stood in plain sight, door ajar, a clear temptation. But Clara wasn't the type to fall for it. She paused, looking at it for a brief moment before turning away, continuing her cleaning without a second thought. Daniel watched all of this through hidden cameras he had installed around the house, his gaze narrowing in suspicion as he reviewed the footage. He had expected Clara to at least peek inside, maybe take something, but to his surprise, she did none of that. She barely acknowledged the open safe, and instead, her attention was drawn to something else entirely. In the footage, Clara could be seen kneeling beside Sophia, the little girl who had barely spoken to anyone since her mother's passing. What Daniel saw next made his chest tighten with emotion. Sophia, who had been so closed off from everyone, threw her arms around Clara with a tenderness Daniel hadn't witnessed since his wife had died. Clara, with her gentle hands and kind smile, embraced Sophia with such warmth that Daniel felt an unexpected pang of confusion. This wasn't just about the safe anymore. He wasn't sure what he had been looking for, but it certainly wasn't this. He had tested Clara's honesty, but in return, he found something much deeper, an unforeseen connection between his daughter and this new woman that both calmed and unsettled him. Daniel's life was once filled with joy. Before the tragedy struck, he was a devoted husband, spending his days surrounded by love and laughter. The days with his wife were a time of happiness, a period when their home was filled with light. He could vividly recall her warm smile, the way she would playfully laugh with their daughter, Sophia. The family's world had been whole, complete, and peaceful. But everything changed the day she passed away. It was as if the light in their lives had been snuffed out in an instant. Daniel was devastated, left to face a reality he never imagined, raising Sophia alone. His wife's sudden death shook him to the core, leaving him empty and emotionally shattered. There was no guidebook on how to carry on, and Daniel felt lost. The impact on Sophia was even more profound. As a young girl, she could not fully comprehend the magnitude of the loss, but she felt it deeply. In the weeks and months that followed, she became increasingly withdrawn, refusing to talk to anyone, not even her father. She retreated into herself, isolating her emotions, her bright laughter fading into the distant past. Daniel, overwhelmed by his grief and uncertainty, made a decision. He vowed to protect Sophia from further harm, no matter the cost. He promised himself that no one would ever hurt her again, not like they had both been hurt by the sudden loss of his wife. But in doing so, Daniel began to emotionally distance himself. He closed off his heart, refusing to let anyone in, even if it meant isolating himself from the world and from his daughter. His fear of losing Sophia the way he had lost his wife caused him to overprotect her. He became stricter, more rigid, watching her every move, ensuring she never faced the pain he had endured. However, in his effort to protect her, Daniel inadvertently built a wall between them, a wall that grew thicker with each passing day. It was a wall of his own creation, formed from the grief and fear that had consumed him. Clara had been quietly observing Sophia from the moment she started working for Daniel. She knew the little girl had been through a lot and understood her need for space. But one afternoon, as Clara prepared Sophia's favorite snack in the kitchen, she noticed the young girl lingering at the doorway, watching her. It was the first sign that Sophia was ready to let someone in. Day by day, Clara gently reached out to Sophia, never pushing her too hard. One day, while Clara was reading a book on the couch, Sophia timidly approached and sat beside her. It was a small gesture, but to Clara, it felt monumental. The little girl who had closed herself off for so long was finally beginning to trust again. Clara and Sophia began spending more time together. Clara would braid Sophia's hair in the morning, and Sophia would ask her questions about the stories Clara told her from her own childhood. Sophia's laughter, once absent from the house, slowly returned, filling the space that had been silent for so long. Daniel started to notice the growing bond between his daughter and Clara. At first, he was relieved that someone had managed to break through Sophia's emotional walls. But as the days passed, he found himself unsettled. He couldn't quite place the feeling, but it nagged at him. Watching them together, a part of him felt uneasy, as if the connection they shared was something he had been unable to provide for his daughter. One evening, Daniel stood in the hallway, watching from a distance as Sophia hugged Clara tightly before bed. The warmth and affection Sophia showed toward Clara was surprising, almost alarming. It was a stark contrast to the distance she had maintained from him. As Daniel turned away, a mix of emotions welled inside him. Relief that his daughter was healing, and a deep, unsettling fear that Clara was becoming more than just a caretaker in their lives. Daniel began to notice Clara more often, observing her as she moved about the house. Her simple acts of kindness towards Sophia, the way she spoke with gentle patience, and her honest, caring demeanor all left a strong impression on him. It was as if Clara had a calming effect on his daughter that he could not replicate. There were moments when Daniel caught himself staring, wondering how someone like her could enter their lives and become so important. He didn't understand the strange mix of emotions that arose in him. He admired Clara's integrity and the sincerity in her actions, yet a part of him felt unsettled by the bond she was forming with his daughter. One evening, as he watched Clara sitting beside Sophia, telling her a story with such tenderness, Daniel felt something unexpected. It wasn't just gratitude or relief. There was something deeper, an admiration that slowly turned into confusion about his own feelings. The internal conflict began to grow. Daniel questioned whether his emotions were appropriate, whether they stemmed from the fact that Clara had become so intertwined in his and Sophia's life, or if there was something more personal developing. He tried to shake off these feelings, but the more he saw Clara caring for his daughter with such natural affection, the more uncertain he became about what he truly felt. Daniel was no longer just a distant observer. He was being drawn into a confusing emotional landscape, unsure of the direction it would take. As Daniel watched Clara and Sophia, a flood of memories began to resurface. He hadn't allowed himself to think about his late wife in this way for some time, but seeing Clara interact with his daughter brought those feelings back. The way Clara's presence brightened Sophia's mood reminded him so much of the love his wife had once shown. A sharp pang of guilt washed over him. How could he even think about another woman when the memory of his wife still lingered so deeply in his heart? The pain of her absence returned, but now it was mixed with confusion about the new emotions stirring inside him. He found himself torn between two worlds: the past, where his wife's memory was sacred, and the present, where Clara seemed to offer something he hadn't realized he needed. It felt wrong to move on, yet he couldn't deny the growing connection he was feeling toward Clara. The guilt gnawed at him, making it hard to accept these new emotions. He remembered the promises he had made to himself and to his late wife, to honor her memory and to protect their daughter. But how could he reconcile those promises with the possibility of moving forward? Torn between his duty to the past and the pull of the present, Daniel felt lost. The weight of the decision began to press down on him, leaving him unsure of how to move forward while still honoring his late wife's memory. Despite Clara's flawless behavior, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He found himself constantly searching for signs of deception, his thoughts spiraling as he tried to prove to himself that his suspicions were justified. Late at night, Daniel sat in his study, watching hours of surveillance footage from the house. His blue eyes were tired, but his determination to find something, anything, that would reveal Clara's true intentions kept him going. But each time he reviewed the tapes, Clara's actions were nothing but impeccable. Her care for Sophia was genuine, her interaction sincere. This only made Daniel's confusion deepen. As Daniel watched Clara playing with Sophia in the garden, his mind wrestled with conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe in her, but the trust he had once placed so easily in others had been shattered by past experiences. The more Clara continued to act with grace and kindness, the more Daniel's internal struggle grew. He couldn't understand why he was trying so hard to find fault in her, yet he couldn't stop himself. Daniel sat in the living room, staring blankly at the family portrait on the wall. His sister Emily stood before him, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. Her words cut deep as she reminded him of how he had distanced himself from everyone since his wife's death. "You've shut us all out, Daniel," Emily said, her voice heavy with emotion. "We've all been here, wanting to support you, but you've isolated yourself." Daniel's heart ached as the weight of her words pressed down on him. As Emily continued, Daniel felt the guilt wash over him. Memories of missed family gatherings, unanswered calls, and the gradual disconnect from those who had once been his closest support hit him hard. He hadn't realized how much he had shut them out. His sister's voice softened as she added, "We miss you, Daniel. We miss Sophia. It's not just about you moving forward, it's about letting us back into your life." The tension inside Daniel grew unbearable. He knew he couldn't keep living in the past, yet the thought of fully letting go of his wife's memory felt like a betrayal. Torn between guilt and the desire to reconnect, he struggled to find a way forward. Daniel sat alone in his office. The light dimmed as he stared at a stack of papers on his desk. He felt a growing distance between himself and everyone else, withdrawing further into his own thoughts. The thought of Clara filled his mind, but every time he thought of her, guilt consumed him. He felt as though having feelings for another woman was a betrayal to his wife's memory, and this internal conflict grew more intense by the day. He tried to push the feelings away, convincing himself that they were wrong. But the more he fought against them, the stronger they became. His guilt, like a heavy weight, dragged him deeper into his loneliness. The memories of his wife haunted him, her laughter echoing in the silence of the room. He felt trapped between the past and the present, unable to move forward, yet unable to let go. Daniel's isolation grew more severe. He avoided calls from his family, ignored friends, and even distanced himself from Sophia. The loneliness wrapped around him, making him feel increasingly lost in a world that once felt familiar. As Daniel reviewed the security footage from his office, his attention was drawn to Clara. At first, it seemed like an ordinary moment, but then a subtle gesture caught his eye, Clara's quiet act of kindness towards one of the workers. He rewound the footage, watching the moment again. The way Clara gently helped the worker, her expression full of compassion, made him pause. It wasn't just a passing gesture. It was sincere and spoke volumes about who she truly was. For the first time, Daniel saw Clara in a different light. She wasn't just an employee or a distant figure. She was someone who radiated a deep kindness. This realization sent waves of conflict through him. He felt torn, as though Clara's presence was starting to heal the wounds he thought would never mend. But the fear of moving on, of betraying his late wife's memory, made him question everything. Could he allow himself to feel again? The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Trusting his own emotions had never felt so difficult. Every step toward Clara felt like a step away from his past, leaving him in an even deeper emotional turmoil. Daniel made the decision to distance himself from Clara. It was for the best, he convinced himself. Cutting ties would protect everyone, especially his daughter. He drafted a letter, formal and distant, asking Clara to step away from their lives. As he typed, his hands hesitated, his heart heavy with uncertainty. The thought of seeing Clara leave left a hollow feeling inside him, a sense of loss he didn't expect. But he continued, believing it was the right thing to do. When he finally sent the letter, a painful realization hit him. This wasn't just about protecting his family. It was about protecting himself from feelings he wasn't ready to face. The weight of his decision settled heavily on his chest. Distancing himself was supposed to ease the tension, but instead, it only deepened his pain. Daniel sat quietly in his office, reflecting on all the decisions that had led him to this point. His mind wandered through memories that felt distant, yet ever present. He began to wonder if he had been clinging too tightly to the past, holding on to guilt and grief that were weighing him down. The pain of losing his wife had shaped so many of his actions. But was it time to let go? An old friend reached out, offering to meet for a coffee, sensing Daniel's internal struggle. Though reluctant at first, Daniel agreed, hoping for some clarity. Sitting across from his friend, the conversation was light at first, but soon turned serious. His friend reminded him that life was too short to live in the shadows of what could have been. As the conversation deepened, Daniel began to question his own priorities. Maybe it wasn't about holding on to the past, but about finding a new way forward, a path that allowed for healing and hope. Small gestures from Clara start to stand out, seemingly insignificant moments now taking on a deeper meaning. Like the time she left a cup of tea on Daniel's desk without saying a word, it had calmed him when he was overwhelmed. Clara's presence had always been gentle, but it was those subtle actions that soothed Daniel's frayed nerves. Each time she quietly stepped in, it was as though she was unknowingly mending a piece of him. Flashbacks reveal moments when Clara's actions had provided Daniel relief. Whether it was her thoughtful words during a tough meeting or her silent, reassuring smile when he needed it most. Daniel begins to piece together these subtle moments, realizing Clara had always been there, helping him heal in ways he hadn't noticed before. She had, in fact, been the balm for his aching heart. As the audience watches these memories play out, they begin to understand that Clara was more than just a kind presence in his life. She had been the key to his quiet recovery all along. Daniel feels the weight of his emotions crushing him. He has tried to keep control, but now everything seems to be slipping through his fingers. Every thought in his mind spirals out of control, leaving him exhausted, confused, and desperate for a solution that seems beyond reach. His confusion reaches a breaking point, and he stands still, staring into the distance as if searching for something, anything, to make sense of the turmoil inside him. Daniel realizes he cannot continue living in this emotional limbo. He has to decide, one way or another, even if the outcome means losing everything. The tension is unbearable, and the situation feels hopeless. The audience begins to feel that Daniel's story is destined for a sorrowful end, with no escape from the pain. Daniel stands in silence, surrounded by his inner turmoil, but in a moment of profound clarity, everything becomes still. He realizes that Clara and Sophia have slowly filled the void in his heart, bringing warmth and love back into his life. As he reflects on their connection, he understands that loving Clara and Sophia is not about forgetting his wife, but about cherishing the love she left behind, allowing him to embrace life again. Daniel sees Sophia playing with Clara, laughing freely, and for the first time, he feels at peace with the idea of moving forward. The bond between Clara and Sophia, something Daniel hadn't fully seen before, now becomes crystal clear. He knows this is what his late wife would have wanted, for him and their daughter to be surrounded by love. With a deep breath, Daniel chooses to accept the love and happiness before him, deciding to build a future with Clara and Sophia. Daniel, feeling the weight of his emotions lift, turns to Clara with a sincerity he hasn't expressed in years. He gently takes her hand, his blue eyes filled with warmth and trust. The moment between them is quiet, but it speaks volumes. For the first time, he's ready to open his heart completely, no longer burdened by guilt or sorrow. Clara meets his gaze, her eyes reflecting the same tenderness. She has been patient, understanding the depth of his pain. Now, seeing him ready to move forward, her heart swells with hope. She feels their connection solidify, and it's clear that their love has the strength to rebuild both of their lives. They sit together on the porch of Daniel's house, watching Sophia play in the garden. Daniel speaks softly, sharing with Clara his decision to start this new chapter, not just for himself, but for them as a family. Clara listens, her hand resting on his shoulder, offering silent support. In the distance, Sophia's laughter fills the air, a sound that brings lightness to the moment. Daniel watches his daughter, the bond between them growing stronger as he embraces the life before him. He realizes that this is what his late wife would have wanted, for him to find happiness again, for their daughter to grow up surrounded by love. As the sun sets, casting a golden glow over the scene, Daniel feels a deep sense of peace. With Clara and Sophia by his side, he knows that the future holds promise. Together, they are ready to build a life filled with joy, love, and the kind of happiness that can only come from healing and acceptance.